Welcome to the Affiliated Monitors Expert Podcast, hosted by Tom Fox on the Compliance Podcast Network. Take a look at the question of how a company assesses its culture, and I'm joined in this exploration by Eric Feldman. So, Eric, thank you for taking time to visit with me, and welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Eric, I'd like to just start with a question about the difference between having a company assess itself or bringing in a truly independent outsider, and whether you have seen better results one way or another, or it's just a different focus.
Well, that's a really good question, Tom. And I think that what we have are different objectives and a different focus. It's critical, and we'll talk about this in a moment, for a company to have an independent third-party assessment of its ethics and compliance program and its culture. And we'll talk about why in a moment. But that does not absolve the company of the responsibility to monitor its own workforce and monitor its own culture on a day-to-day basis. That ongoing monitoring and oversight is critical to being able to manage what is a very normal ebb and flow, if you will, of the culture in an organization. As we've discussed before, cultures are dependent on people, and people come and people go in companies, and that can influence the culture. The market and financial stress can influence the culture and what happens within a company. Getting good supervisors and leaders who understand the ethics and integrity imperatives, and bad supervisors who might feel that we'll do anything in order to meet our financial objectives. That can change the culture and the way we do business. So the company needs to stay on top of that on a regular basis. The way to do that is very simple. Know your people. Now, I know it's not that simple. The answer is simple. Getting there is a little bit more complex and a little bit more of a challenge. One of the common things that we have seen in going into companies and doing assessments or monitoring engagements after an ethical crisis is that we see leaders in companies that really don't know their own workforce. And they don't know their workforce because they don't get out and talk to them. They rely on filtered reports and information that they may get from people. They rely on what their best hope is on how people think about the company, but they don't know firsthand. And the way to do that is for them to take the temperature through various means like employee surveys, conversations, visits to field operations on the part of senior leadership. And all of those need to be two-way conversations to get an understanding of how employees are viewing the company, its policies and procedures, how they're being treated, because often leaders don't understand how they're being perceived and whether employees are getting mixed messages. Now, one thing I mentioned were surveys. Now, surveys can be very important tools, and HR frequently uses employee surveys on a regular basis to take the temperature of what's going on in the company. But often there is a wasted opportunity there to put in questions that are specifically targeted toward culture and the ethical culture of the company. Also targeted to whether or not the company has created a comfortable speak up culture, whether there is a comfort level raising issues, questions, or identifying misconduct up through their managers, or whether there's a fear if they do that, they'll be retaliated against. One of the kind of double-edged swords of surveys is that we have found in some organizations where employees don't trust their company they'll tell the company what it wants to hear on these surveys rather than be honest. And sometimes in the most challenged of organizations, the survey results are skewed because employees don't trust the confidentiality of the survey, and they are telling the company what they want to hear. That makes it even more challenging to understand what's going on in your own company.
Eric, can you use these same techniques literally across multiple countries, multiple geographic regions, and multiple cultures within an organization? Or do you have to fine tune even how you would ask the questions, whether it's through individual interviews or surveys going forward?
Well, you have to take into account the culture and the willingness of people in different parts of the world to participate in these various methods of collecting data and collecting their perspectives. As we know from hotlines, there are some parts of the world where employees will never use a hotline. They view it as a horrible thing to rat out another employee or a manager through an anonymous mechanism. And in some countries, particularly European countries, as a leftover of World War II, you can't take an anonymous complaint. It's not allowed. Even doing focus groups and interviews of employees, even going out and just talking to them, some parts of the world, it would be seen as a high level of disrespect to say anything negative about their immediate managers. So you have to fine tune how you're going to get a good understanding and get some metrics on what the ethical culture is. So in those cases, there are other metrics you can look at. You can look at the data and people coming forward in hotline cases, or not necessarily hotline, but cases of employees coming forward and saying, hey, something just doesn't look right, without being anonymous, to kind of gauge comfort level. Surveys and even focus groups can be helpful, but this kind of gets into the issue of a third party getting involved. It is helpful to take the temperature internally by doing regular monitoring of your company to understand its culture and what needs to be done. But honestly, employees are not going to be as honest and forthcoming with someone in their company as they would be with a third party. And the reason is they're always afraid of the potential blowback on them. And employees will be much more reserved with people that they know or people in their own company than what we found in the process of doing independent third-party assessment work.
Well, Eric, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time. I've been visiting today with Eric Feldman on how a company should assess its culture. Eric, as always, thank you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode in my 5-part exploration of ethical culture with Vin DiCiani and Eric Feldman from Affiliated Monitors, who is the sponsor of this series. I hope you'll join us again for our next episode. This special 5-part series on ethical culture is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.